Welcome to Almost Alone. Tonight's episode takes us into the backcountry, the kind of places where cell service disappears, where the trail stretches for miles without another soul, where the only sounds are your footsteps and your breathing. Hiking is supposed to be peaceful, restorative, a chance to disconnect from the noise of everyday life and spend time in solitude. But solitude has a dark side. When you're alone on a trail, miles from the nearest road, you're not just disconnected from technology. You're disconnected from help, from witnesses, from anyone who might notice if something goes wrong. And some people know that. Some people watch trailheads. They learn routes. They follow at a distance. They wait for the right moment when you're tired, when your guard is down, when you've convinced yourself that the only danger out here is weather or wildlife. The three stories you're about to hear are from people who thought they were alone in the wilderness. They weren't. Before we begin, if you're new here, welcome. If you've been listening for a while, I appreciate you. Either way, if these stories resonate with you, consider liking the episode and subscribing. It helps more people find the channel. These stories are told calmly, but they're not light. They're real, and they linger. Let's begin. I've been hiking for 6 years, mostly day trips, some overnights, nothing too extreme. I'm comfortable in the woods. I know how to read maps, filter water, hang a bear bag. I'm not reckless. This happened in late September on a 5-day loop trail in the White Cloud Wilderness. It's a remote area in central Idaho. Beautiful, rugged, not heavily trafficked. That was the appeal. I wanted solitude. The trailhead was empty when I arrived. I signed the register, noted my planned route, and started walking. First day was perfect. Clear skies, moderate elevation gain, the kind of hiking that clears your head. I made camp near a creek around 6 p.m., ate dinner, and fell asleep to the sound of water moving over rocks. Day 2 started the same way. Broke camp early, filtered water, kept moving. The trail followed the ridgeline for most of the morning, then dropped into a valley that cut through a mix of national forest and private land. I knew this from my map. There were a few in holdings, old mining claims that had been grandfathered in when the wilderness area was established. The trail passed through legally, but the land on either side wasn't public. That's when I started seeing the signs. No trespassing, private property, keep out, normal enough. Landowners protecting their space. But something about them felt off. They were nailed to trees facing inward, toward the private land, not toward the trail. Like they were meant to keep someone in, not keep hikers out. I stopped at one and looked at it for a long time. The sign was weathered but not old. Maybe a year, maybe 2. It had been placed deliberately, the nails driven deep, the angle precise. I kept walking. Around midday, I passed what looked like an old hunting camp. Fire ring, a few scattered logs arranged as seating. The ashes in the pit were fresh, not smoking, but gray and soft, like they'd been doused within the last day or 2. No one else had signed the trail register. I was sure of that. I told myself it was probably locals accessing their property from a different route. People who knew the area and didn't bother with official trailheads. I made camp that night near the edge of a clearing, close enough to the trail to feel visible, far enough into the trees to have some cover. I hung my food, set up my tent, and cooked dinner as the sun dropped behind the mountains. The woods got quiet fast. Not the peaceful kind of quiet, the wrong kind. No birds, no insects, just stillness. I crawled into my tent around 9 p.m. and lay there listening. That's when I heard the footsteps. Slow, deliberate, pacing the perimeter of my campsite in a wide circle, maybe 30 feet out. Not an animal. Animals don't pace. They move with purpose or they freeze. This was something else, methodical, patient, like someone walking a patrol route. I didn't move. I barely breathed. The steps continued for what felt like an hour, around and around, never getting closer, never stopping. Then, around midnight, they just stopped. I waited in the dark, listening for any sound. A branch snapping, boots on gravel, anything, nothing. I didn't sleep that night. At first light, I unzipped the tent and looked around. The campsite was undisturbed. My gear was where I'd left it. The food bag still hung from the tree, but there were boot prints in the soft dirt near the clearing, fresh ones. They circled my tent in a near-perfect loop, stopping every 10 feet or so like someone had paused to look. The tread was deep and clear, heavy boots, men's size 11 or 12. I followed the prints to the edge of the clearing. That's where I saw the drag marks. 2 long parallel gouges in the dirt, leading from the clearing into the dense trees toward the private property line, like something heavy had been pulled. The boot prints followed the drag marks for about 20 feet, then disappeared into the underbrush. I stood there for a long time, staring at those marks. Then I packed my gear and got back on the trail. I told myself it was a hunter dragging a deer. That's what people do. They field dress the animal and haul it back to camp, or to a truck parked on private land. But deer don't leave 2 parallel lines. They leave uneven trails, legs dragging at different angles, fur catching on branches. This was something else. I hiked faster that day. I didn't stop for lunch. I just kept moving, checking over my shoulder every few minutes, scanning the tree line. By late afternoon, I reached the next campsite marked on my map, a small clearing near a spring. I set up my tent, filtered water, and forced myself to eat something even though my stomach was tight. As the sun set, I noticed the signs again. No trespassing. This time, there were more of them. Every 50 feet or so, nailed to trees in a rough line, all facing inward. I was still on the public trail, but the signs were getting closer. That night, the pacing started again. Same pattern, same slow, deliberate rhythm, circling the camp just outside the range of my headlamp. This time, I turned on my light and pointed it toward the sound. Nothing, just trees and darkness. But the footsteps didn't stop. They kept moving, just beyond the edge of the beam, like whoever it was knew exactly where the light ended. I sat inside my tent, with my knife in my hand, until the pacing stopped around 2 a.m. In the morning, I found the boot prints again. Same tread, same size. But this time, they didn't circle the tent. They came right up to it, stopped at the front flap, then turned and walked back into the woods. I didn't finish the loop. I packed everything, found the nearest trail junction, and took the shortest route back to the trailhead. I hiked 14 miles that day without stopping. When I got to my car, I sat in the driver's seat for 20 minutes, doors locked, just breathing. I didn't report it. I didn't know what to report. Someone walked near my campsite. Someone dragged something into the woods. It all sounded paranoid, circumstantial. I went home. I unpacked. I tried to forget about it. 3 months later, I got a call from a detective in Idaho. They'd found remains, 4 bodies, maybe more, buried in shallow graves on private land adjacent to the White Cloud Wilderness Trail system. The property belonged to a man in his 50s who'd lived alone for over a decade. No record, no red flags, just someone who owned land and kept to himself. Until hikers started disappearing. The detective said they believed he'd been targeting solo hikers and small groups for at least 18 months, watching the trail, following people to their campsites, waiting for the right moment. They asked if I'd seen anything unusual during my trip. I told them about the boot prints, the pacing, the drag marks. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Then the detective said, "You're lucky you left when you did." They found my name in a notebook in the suspect's cabin, my vehicle description, my license plate number, the date I signed the trail register, and a note next to my name. Day 3, tent too close to trail, skipped. I don't know why he didn't come into my tent that night. I don't know what made me different from the others. Maybe it was luck. Maybe I camped in a spot that felt too exposed. Maybe I made too much noise, stayed awake too long, seemed too unpredictable. Or maybe he just decided I wasn't worth the risk. I think about that sometimes. The fact that my survival came down to a decision someone else made, not something I did right, not skill or preparation, just a man in the woods deciding I wasn't the one. And I think about those no trespassing signs facing the wrong direction. They weren't there to keep hikers out. They were there to mark the boundary of his hunting ground. I planned this trip for months. A 4-day solo hike through the Gila Wilderness in New Mexico. Remote, beautiful, challenging, but manageable. I'm an experienced hiker. I've done plenty of solo trips. I know the risks, I take precautions, and I trust my instincts. This was supposed to be a reset, a chance to disconnect, clear my head, and spend a few days in total solitude. It started exactly as I'd hoped. Day 1 was perfect. I made good time, the weather held, and I camped near a seasonal creek that still had water. I cooked dinner, watched the stars come out, and slept better than I had in months. Day 2 was more of the same. Steady hiking, beautiful scenery, the kind of silence that feels restorative instead of oppressive. By mid-afternoon on day 3, I was ahead of schedule. I decided to take a detour to explore a side canyon I'd read about, a narrow slot with petroglyphs and a reliable spring. That's where I found the cache. It was tucked behind a boulder about 20 feet off the trail, partially hidden by scrub oak. At first, I almost walked past it, but something about the placement caught my eye. It looked deliberately concealed, not just randomly discarded. It was an old military-style ammo can, the kind people use for geocaching or emergency supply stashes. Weathered green paint, rusted hinges, but still sealed. I'm not usually the type to open random containers in the wilderness, but I was curious, and part of me thought maybe it was a geocache, something left by other hikers as part of a trail game. I pried it open. Inside were photographs, not old ones, recent ones, printed on regular photo paper, slightly curled at the edges but still crisp. The first photo showed a campsite, a blue tent, a backpack leaning against a tree, a small cook stove on the ground. My campsite, from the night before. I stared at it, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. The angle was wrong. It wasn't taken from the trail. It was taken from higher up, maybe 15 feet off the ground, like someone had climbed a tree to get the shot. I flipped to the next photo, me. Cooking breakfast that morning, I was crouched by my stove, stirring oatmeal, completely unaware. The photo was clear enough that I could see the expression on my face. Relaxed, calm, lost in thought. My hand started shaking. I went through the rest of the photos. Me sleeping in my tent. The angle was from outside, shot through the mesh window. My face was visible in the dim light of my headlamp. Me filtering water at the creek. Me sitting on a log, eating lunch. Me walking on the trail, pack on, looking at my map. There were 11 photos total. All of me. All from the last 2 days. At the bottom of the stack was a handwritten note on a torn piece of notebook paper. Day 3. You're making good time. I dropped the can. I stood there for a long time, trying to control my breathing, trying to think. Someone had been following me, watching me, taking photos while I slept, while I ate, while I thought I was completely alone. I grabbed my phone even though I knew there was no service, nothing, not even a bar. I looked around the canyon, empty, silent, no movement, but that didn't mean anything. Whoever took those photos had been close enough to hear me breathe, and I'd never seen them, never heard them. I left the cache where it was and started hiking back toward the main trail. Fast, not running, but close. Every sound made me stop and turn around. A bird taking off from a branch, a rock shifting underfoot, the wind moving through the trees. I kept expecting to see someone behind me, kept imagining a figure standing just out of sight, watching me panic. Nothing. I made it back to the trail and kept moving. I didn't stop to rest, didn't stop to eat. I just hiked. By the time the sun started setting, I was exhausted, but I couldn't bring myself to set up camp. The idea of lying down in a tent, in the dark, knowing someone could be out there with a camera, or worse, made my skin crawl. I found a spot just off the trail with decent visibility in all directions. I didn't set up my tent. I just sat with my back against a tree, headlamp off, knife in my hand, and waited for morning. I didn't sleep. Every hour or so, I'd turn on my headlamp and scan the area. Nothing. Just darkness and trees and my own paranoia. At first light, I packed everything and started hiking out. I still had 2 days left on my original itinerary, but I didn't care. I just wanted to get back to the trailhead. It took me 9 hours of hard hiking to reach my car. When I got there, I sat in the driver's seat and locked the doors. I was shaking so badly I could barely get the key in the ignition. I drove to the nearest ranger station and filed a report. I told them about the cache, the photos, the note. The ranger took it seriously. He said they'd send someone out to investigate, and he asked if I had the photos with me. I didn't. I'd left the cache exactly where I found it. The idea of carrying those photos with me felt wrong, like I'd be bringing the person who took them along for the ride. The ranger called me 2 weeks later. They'd found the cache. The photos were gone. The can was empty except for the note, which was still there. They searched the area but didn't find any evidence of a camp or recent activity. No footprints, no gear, nothing. The ranger said it was possible the person had come back and removed the photos after I left. Or maybe they were never planning to leave them there long term. He also said I wasn't the first person to report something like this. Over the past year, 3 other hikers, all solo, all in remote areas of the Gila, had reported similar experiences. Caches with photos, notes, evidence of surveillance. No one had been caught, no one had been hurt, but someone was out there, watching, following, documenting. The ranger told me to be careful, to consider hiking with a partner, to trust my instincts. I haven't been back to the Gila. I still hike, but I don't go solo anymore. And I don't camp in places where I can't see the trail because I can't stop thinking about those photos, how close that person was, how many times they watched me without me knowing, and the note. Day 3, you're making good time. Like they were keeping track, like they had a plan, and I have no idea what would have happened on day 4. I was 3 days into a solo section hike on the Appalachian Trail when I reached the shelter. It was late afternoon, and I was tired. The day had been longer than I'd planned. Steeper climbs, more mud, slower pace. By the time I saw the turnoff for the shelter, I was ready to stop. AT shelters are 3-sided wooden structures with a raised sleeping platform. They're first come, first served. If someone's already there, you share the space. It's trail culture. Most of the time, it's fine. When I arrived, the shelter looked empty, but there was gear inside. A sleeping bag laid out neatly on the left side of the platform, a pair of boots on the ground below, a pack leaning against the back wall, partially covered with a tarp. I waited outside for a few minutes, expecting the owner to come back from filtering water or using the privy. No one came. I called out, "Hello? Anyone here?" No response. I checked my watch. It was almost 5 p.m. The sun would be down in less than 2 hours, and the next shelter was another 6 miles. I didn't want to hike in the dark. I decided to stay and share the space. I set my pack down on the right side of the platform, as far from the other person's gear as I could. Like most AT hikers, I'd written my trail name on my pack in permanent marker. Just Mapper, nothing clever. It's what people do out here. Makes it easier to track each other in shelter logs. I filtered water from the nearby spring, ate a quick dinner, and hung my food bag in the designated spot. By the time I settled in for the night, it was almost dark. The other person's gear was still there, untouched. I lay in my sleeping bag, staring at the ceiling, listening. Nothing. No footsteps, no rustling, no voices. Just the sound of wind moving through the trees and the occasional creak of the shelter settling. Around 2 a.m., I woke up. I don't know what pulled me out of sleep. Maybe a sound, maybe just the unease of sharing a space with a stranger who hadn't shown up. I turned on my headlamp and looked around. The gear was gone, all of it. The sleeping bag, the boots, the pack. Like it had never been there. I sat up, heart pounding, scanning the shelter. Empty. Just me and my stuff. I got out of my sleeping bag and walked to the edge of the platform, shining my light into the darkness beyond the shelter. That's when I saw the footprints. Muddy boot prints on the wooden floor of the shelter. Fresh, still wet. They led from the entrance of the shelter to the edge of my sleeping pad. Stopped, then turned and walked back out. I followed the prints with my light, my breath catching in my throat. They stopped about 2 inches from where my head had been. I stood there for a long time, staring at those prints, trying to process what I was seeing. Someone had been in the shelter, standing over me while I slept, close enough to touch, and then they'd left, taken their gear, disappeared. I didn't sleep for the rest of the night. I sat on the platform with my back against the wall, knife in my hand, headlamp on, watching the entrance. No one came back. At first light, I examined the footprints more closely. They were clear, deliberate, size 10 or 11, deep tread, same pattern all the way across the floor. I packed my gear and got out of there as fast as I could. I hiked 10 miles that day without stopping. Every time I heard footsteps on the trail behind me, I'd step aside and let the person pass, watching their face, checking their boots. None of them matched. That night, I camped in my tent, far off trail, in a spot where I could see anyone approaching from a distance. I didn't use the shelters for the rest of the trip. When I finished the section and got back to my car, I reported the incident to the Trail Conservancy. I told them about the gear, the footprints, the fact that someone had been standing over me while I slept. They said they'd look into it. They asked if I'd gotten a description of the person. I hadn't. I'd never seen them. 2 months later, I got an email from the Conservancy. They'd received multiple reports from other hikers about the same shelter. People finding gear that disappeared during the night. Footprints that didn't belong to anyone in the group. Strange sounds, pacing, breathing, movement just outside the shelter after dark. No one had been hurt, but several people had reported feeling watched. One hiker said they'd woken up to find their headlamp moved from where they'd left it, placed carefully on the ground next to their sleeping bag, pointing at their face. Another said they'd heard someone whispering their trail name in the dark. But when they turned on their light, no one was there. The Conservancy said they were increasing patrols in the area. They advised hikers to tent camp instead of using that particular shelter, but they never found anyone. No suspect, no explanation. Just reports, patterns, a growing sense that someone was using the shelters as hunting grounds. I think about that night sometimes. The way the gear was arranged so neatly, like bait. The way it disappeared the moment I fell asleep. And I think about those footprints, stopping inches from my face. Someone had been standing there, watching me, breathing, deciding, and then they'd walked away. I don't know why. I don't know what they were waiting for, but I know I was alone in that shelter until I wasn't. That's the end of tonight's episode. 3 people, 3 trails, 3 encounters with someone who understood that the wilderness isn't just remote, it's private. A place where no one can hear you scream, where no one knows you're in trouble until you don't come home. The people in tonight's stories survived because of timing, because they left early, because they stayed awake, because they trusted the feeling that something was wrong, not because they were prepared for what they found out there, because you can't prepare for someone who's been watching you sleep. If tonight's episode resonated with you, I'd appreciate it if you'd take a moment to like the video or leave a comment. If you have your own story you'd like to share, you can submit it through the link in the description. And if you haven't already, subscribe. There's more to come. Thank you for listening. Stay safe, stay aware, and if you're hiking alone, maybe look behind you once in a while. I'll see you in the next one.